Every year, alumni of the National Institute of Dramatic Arts, commonly referred to as NIDA, are invited to watch as the graduating class performs their final theatrical shows. It's their unique tradition. This setup provides an invaluable opportunity for the new graduates, whether they're actors, set designers, costume designers, or involved in other aspects of theater production, to interact with both well-known and less famous figures from the world of entertainment. The graduates seek to gain candid critiques of their artistic efforts and, ideally, forge new professional relationships that could aid their career trajectories. In the midst of one such event, a notable actress and former student of NIDA was present, though we'll keep her identity confidential to protect her privacy. As she mingled among the attendees following the performance, memories of her own graduation some years prior filled her with a sense of nostalgia and gratitude. Her career had flourished since those early days. What started with local acting jobs soon escalated to significant opportunities in Hollywood, enabling her to be selective about the roles she undertook. Recently, her agent had proposed she consider playing the role of an escort in an upcoming project, a part she found intriguing for its playful challenge. Despite the crowd's eager attempts to engage her in conversation, the actress remained focused on her purpose for attending, to provide constructive feedback and encouragement to the emerging talents. As she interacted with the production's cast and crew, she was particularly impressed by a young woman named Sarah, a set designer whose innovative spatial arrangements and dynamic set interactions caught her eye. Just as the actress was about to continue her rounds, Sarah approached her with a hesitant request. "My dad would really like to invite you to dinner tonight," Sarah said, a bit anxiously. Laughing gently, the actress replied, "Honey, I get a lot of dinner invitations. Here, give this card to your dad and have him call my agent to set something up." But before she could move away, Sarah interjected, "He mentioned his name is Mr. X." Hearing that name made the actress stop in her tracks. Suddenly, she found herself facing a ghost from her past she thought she had left behind. The revelation brought an immediate mix of emotions. After all, this was the man with a new role in her life, Sarah's father. Considering he now had an adult daughter, the actress reassumed it unlikely that he would pose any harm, especially in such a setting. Interestingly, she owed Mr. X a peculiar debt of gratitude. He was the one who had first suggested she pursue acting, an offhand recommendation that had redirected her from studying economics to applying to NIDA, setting her on the path to her current success. Nevertheless, a part of her still regarded him warily due to their past, an interaction that had occurred just once, but was enough to forever alter her view of him. The actress had meticulously prepared for years to protect her reputation should aspects of her past ever surface in the media. She crafted strategies and backup plans, ensuring she could defend herself if her history ever became tabloid fodder. Although she felt strong enough to handle any public controversy, she deeply wished to avoid such conflicts. The idea of having dinner with Mr. X sparked a blend of apprehension and curiosity within her. Given their brief singular encounter years ago, she was intrigued by what might be revealed. What significance could one meeting have held? Despite her reservations, the presence of his family at the dinner seemed to mitigate the potential risks, prompting her to accept Sarah's invitation. They arranged to meet at a nearby restaurant, not too far from where she was staying. This allowed her some time to mingle further before she needed to prepare for the evening. Her preparations for the dinner were thorough. From the back of her limousine, she first contacted her lawyer to discuss the situation and then called her husband. He was particularly insistent that she keep him updated, especially as she sought to unravel a mystery that had lingered for 14 years. Upon her arrival at the restaurant, she made her way to a private dining room reserved for their meeting. Just before she entered, she composed herself, adopting a confident demeanor to mask the underlying nerves. She had already planned her response should the encounter take an undesirable turn. Her lawyer was informed and prepared, especially with the knowledge of Mr. X's daughter being involved. Stepping into the room, her initial anxiety was quickly alleviated. She was greeted by familiar faces, Sarah and another younger girl, clearly members of Mr. X's family. Her gaze then moved to the man himself, recognizable from their encounter a decade and a half earlier. He introduced himself formally as David Brown and took the time to introduce his wife and daughters to her. The meal unfolded pleasantly, with the family engaging in typical celebrity-centered conversation, posing questions people often asked of someone in her line of work. After they finished their main courses, David signaled for a moment of quiet. He expressed his appreciation for the actress's presence, noting it was significant now that his youngest daughter had turned 18. He prepared to share his perspective on the events that linked them, a narrative he had kept to himself until this moment. His readiness to disclose his side of the story, with the actress there to corroborate or correct details, marked a crucial point in the evening. As the actress watched the two young girls at the table, their faces filled with expectancy, she realized she too was leaning forward in her chair, caught up in the moment. With a small smile, she eased back into her seat, trying to adopt a more relaxed posture. Across the table, Dave seemed visibly tense, the weight of the conversation pressing down on him. Beside him, his wife Maria appeared as an anchor of calmness, gently holding his hand in a supportive grip. After receiving a comforting squeeze from Maria, Dave exchanged a look with her, then turned his attention back to the actress before continuing his explanation. Dave started by clarifying the reason behind his decision to reveal his story now. His first reason, he shared with a nod towards the actress, was to fulfill a promise he had made to safeguard her reputation, addressing an incident from 15 years earlier that could potentially resurface and cause her distress. The actress acknowledged his consideration with a nod of gratitude, appreciating his effort to put her at ease. The second part of his revelation was more personal and directed at his daughters. He disclosed that they had not seen their biological mother for over 14 years. Dave admitted he had originally planned to discuss this with his eldest daughter, Sarah, when she turned 18, yet the moment never arose as she hadn't inquired about it. He acknowledged Maria's role as a wonderful mother to both girls, expressing his deep appreciation for her presence and the stability she provided. As he moved deeper into the conversation, Dave prepared his daughters for a difficult truth, indicating that he would soon seek their forgiveness for some unilateral decisions he had made long ago, decisions that deeply affected their family's dynamics. With the room hanging on his every word, Dave was ready to unfold the story from the very beginning, tracing back to the choices that had shaped their lives in unexpected ways. Meanwhile, far from the intimate setting of the dinner, a woman found herself wide awake in the stark, dimly lit room of a budget motel. Beside her, the loud snores of the man she was with filled the space. Lying there, she pondered the cascade of poor decisions that had led her to her current, desolate circumstances.
Martha sighed. Present day. Growing up, I didn't start off with a sense of entitlement, but perhaps it developed over time because everything seemed to just fall into place for me without much struggle. My childhood was spent in a comfortable middle-class home where I was provided for in every way. School came easily to me, and I breezed through university, earning an arts degree and teaching certification with little difficulty. Right out of college, thanks to my father's connections, I landed an excellent teaching position at a reputable school. No need to prove myself in some distant, unfamiliar place. For the next 5 years, I indulged in various hobbies and relationships, enjoying the freedom to explore different facets of life without settling down to any particular commitment. Life was simple and enjoyable, a series of experiences that I dipped into at my leisure. However, when I turned 28, my father, who had advanced in his career to become a chief aide to a federal senator, urged me to consider a more focused path. He himself had ambitions that had plateaued. Reaching an office as prestigious as his boss's was out of his grasp. Perhaps he saw in me the potential to achieve what he hadn't, or maybe he simply recognized a latent capability within me. Whatever his reasons, during an hour-long conversation about the influence and power of political office, he inspired me to set an ambitious goal to become our country's first female prime minister within the next 20 years. The blueprint we drafted for achieving this goal was comprehensive. It included climbing the career ladder, starting a family, becoming active in a political party, engaging with a mainstream church, and committing to charitable work. Armed with this plan, I felt invigorated, as if all my goals were once again attainable. It was through my involvement in the church that I met the man who would become my husband, though the circumstances were not as one might expect. During a church meeting, I found myself distracted by the noise coming from the apse where some renovation work was being carried out. I went over to ask the worker to keep the noise down. He was on his knees, back turned to me, and when he stood and turned around, his smile and the earthy scent of him struck a chord with me. We were married less than a year later. He might have been just a cabinet maker, but his trade was a respectable one, and it supplemented my income sufficiently for us to purchase a lovely house in the most desirable part of town. Our life together began on this simple yet solid foundation, fueled by the ambitions that were now firmly set in my sights. We decided to delay starting our family for a bit after getting married. Around this time, I joined the local Liberal Party, which led to connections with influential members on the board of an exclusive girls' school. With their endorsement, my career progressed rapidly. I moved up from deputy head to headmistress in just a few years. I had been serving in that position for 2 years when I made a decision that would later become the most significant mistake of my life. Despite taking 2 maternity leaves, first for my daughter Sarah, born in 1998, and then for Wendy 2 years later, I was able to secure and maintain my leadership position. I was keen to jump back into work and resume my responsibilities with various committees and fundraisers just 3 months after each child was born. However, my father advised me to extend each leave to a year, cautioning that public perception of my role as a mother would be critically judged. Fast forward to when the real crux of my story begins. Sarah was 6 years old, Wendy was 4, and we had moved into an even more impressive house. By then, I was not only a successful headmistress but also chaired several charity organizations and was deeply involved in church activities, so much so that it seemed the church couldn't function without my input. Moreover, I was the leading candidate to head our party's ticket in the upcoming state election, which was still 2 years away. Life was hectic and sometimes exhausting, but also incredibly fulfilling. My weeks were packed with 3 to 4 committee meetings, fundraisers, and the responsibilities of hosting church guests. It was a non-stop whirlwind of activity, and I always had to be camera-ready with a polished appearance and a ready smile. Dave was instrumental in managing our home life. He ran his own business, which allowed him the flexibility to finish work early enough to pick up the girls from school and daycare. He took on the lion's share of caregiving in the evenings and handled most of our weekend social engagements as well. While he was doing all this, I was often out attending to my commitments or catching up on rest to prepare for another busy week. One New Year's, shortly before my marriage began to unravel, I made a resolution to spend more time with Dave and our daughters. However, after being away so much, I felt more like an outsider than a member of my own family. Just as I tried to reconnect, various pressures and demands on my time pulled me away once again. Amidst my myriad responsibilities, I also had to maintain my teaching credentials, which required me to attend 2 conferences annually. That year, amidst all the chaos, I overlooked informing Dave about the last conference until it was nearly time to leave. Unbeknownst to me, he had arranged for a babysitting service for the entire weekend, having planned a romantic escape just for the 2 of us. Understandably, he was disappointed when I broke the news of my conflicting schedule, but I assumed he would eventually get over it as he usually did. Given that the conference would take me away both Friday and Saturday nights, I tried to make amends by promising Dave a special evening together on Sunday. However, his reaction was lukewarm at best. He spoke very little to me in the days leading up to my departure. Internally, I acknowledged the need to be more thoughtful in the future, especially since a divorce at this juncture would have been particularly damaging to both my personal life and my burgeoning political aspirations. On the first night of the conference, Dave didn't call, which I attributed to his ongoing upset. When he finally did call on Saturday night, it was much later than usual, past dinner time. I thought perhaps he was ready to move past his initial irritation. We exchanged mundane updates about our days. I was distracted and aware of the late hour, plus the wine I had at dinner was making me feel its effects. I've never been good with alcohol, easily tipsy after just a little, a 2-pot screamer, as it's humorously known locally. Wanting to ensure I'd be fresh for an early seminar the next morning, I tried to wrap up the conversation quickly. "I have to go now, Dave, darling. The first seminar starts at 8 tomorrow morning." "Okay. Should I tell the girls you miss them?" "Of course. Give them a kiss from me." "Will do. Say hi to Alan for me." "Okay, I'll—" "What?" The line went dead after that. "Oh, right, I hadn't mentioned Alan yet." To be blunt, Alan had been my lover for nearly a year. Starting an affair wasn't a conscious choice for me, but reflecting on it now, it seems like a natural progression of my mindset at the time. I had achieved nearly everything I wanted, so I guess a part of me thought, why not this too? Alan was part of the PR team hired by my political party to craft my image. Our work meant we spent a lot of time together. He was always setting up my interviews and managing how I was portrayed to the public. One weekend, after we nailed a major charity event, a celebration with too much wine led to us ending up in bed together. The morning after, panic set in. The potential fallout of getting caught loomed large in my mind. I was convinced that any hint of scandal would torpedo my political aspirations instantly. For days, I was hypervigilant, constantly on the lookout for any hint that our secret had leaked, but nothing surfaced. Gradually, my fears subsided, and I allowed myself to relax a little. Yet, the affair wasn't just a one-off mistake fueled by alcohol. It didn't stop after that night. Alan was young, good-looking, and there was a chemistry between us that was hard to ignore. The thrill of the secrecy, the risk, it all added to the excitement. Truth be told, I never really considered breaking it off. Even a year into our affair, our encounters, though infrequent, just a few times a month, remained intensely passionate. I justified it as a sort of reward for the years of hard work and sacrifices I had made. It never crossed my mind to consider the sacrifices Dave had made for our family. Over time, I had developed a sense of entitlement, feeling like I deserved this indulgence. Then came the night it all came crashing down. I was on the phone with Dave, standing in shock with Alan still in my room, realizing the severity of the situation. Alan and I recognized this as the biggest crisis we had faced. In that moment of panic, I started to question how our secret could have possibly come out. We had always been meticulous. Our meetings took place out of town, we used disguises, and I always knew exactly where Dave was to avoid any chance encounters. Whenever we traveled for work, Alan and I would book separate rooms with connecting doors to avoid suspicion. I was always cautious to leave no trace of Alan when returning home. No scent, no stray hairs, nothing that might give us away. I was well aware that if Dave ever suspected infidelity, Alan would be his top suspect, given how much time we spent together. That awareness made us even more cautious during our trysts, except for that one weekend. The trip wasn't strictly political, so Alan had no reason to be at my hotel. But knowing Dave was busy with Sarah's soccer finals all weekend, I figured there was no chance of him showing up. As long as I was careful getting Alan in and out of my room, I thought everything was risk-free. Or so I thought. That's why Dave's casual remarks and my slip-up, whether due to the wine or Alan keeping me up the night before, rattled me to the core. It took me a moment to remember I had a backup plan for this. Even though it was late, I called Daddy and he got his lawyer involved. Looking back, I probably should have handled things differently. Maybe if I had gone straight home, told Dave it was over, and begged for his forgiveness, he might have forgiven me. He was very family-oriented after all. It was just one affair after all. I'll never know if the intense confrontation Dave launched shortly after was inevitable from that point, or if it was my reaction to getting caught that triggered it. Daddy was appalled at my actions and warned me that I had given Dave the power to ruin everything I had worked so hard for. He arranged for me to catch the next flight home and told me to pack and get to the airport. Alan's reaction to the whole ordeal was surprising, though maybe it shouldn't have been. I had pretended to have deep feelings for him to make things more exciting, and his response proved he cared deeply. It was sad to see him begging me to leave my husband and marry him. I apologize for that. Let me provide a more detailed and paraphrased version of the text. This made me stop and think briefly, but not for long. I didn't love Alan. My heart belonged to Dave. Sure, I cared deeply for Alan and enjoyed the attention from a younger man. Having a secret lover was exhilarating, but leaving my husband for him was out of the question. Moreover, having a partner much younger than me, whom I'd leave my husband and break up my family for, would only invite ridicule and likely ruin my career. However, I did feel compassion for Alan, who had fallen deeply in love with me. As a gesture, I promised to visit him once he returned from his trip, after my home situation had settled. Just because Dave had discovered my affair didn't necessarily mean I had to end it, right? Unless Dave insisted and used it against me, I supposed. I'll keep the details brief, but essentially my father, his lawyer, my sister and I arrived at my family home early Sunday morning just as Dave and the girls were about to head out to the zoo. We managed to convince Dave to come back inside the house while my sister took the girls off to the zoo on their own. I was utterly exhausted and completely unprepared for the confrontation that was about to unfold, so I stayed mostly quiet and let my father and the lawyer do most of the talking. Originally, my father had been skeptical about my marrying Dave, given his background as a tradesman. However, over the years, Dave's genuine likability had won him over, and they had become good friends. But in this moment of crisis, my father chose to stand by me without hesitation, which I knew must have been tough on Dave. The conversation that followed was intense. My father began by laying out what he thought were the expectations on me to remain faithful, expectations that he suggested might have been unrealistic, considering our very different backgrounds, incomes, and achievements. Hearing him say that, I felt an overwhelming sense of guilt. It was clear I had caused Dave a lot of pain, and seeing him so hurt made my heart sink. I tried to make eye contact with Dave, hoping to show him how sorry I was, but he wouldn't meet my gaze and just kept staring down at the table, looking utterly defeated. The discussion quickly escalated as accusations began to fly. The air was thick with the threat of legal action. Gag orders, lawsuits for libel and slander were mentioned. Through it all, Dave sat there, his face emotionless, absorbing every word. When my father pressed him for proof of my infidelity, Dave quietly admitted that he didn't have any concrete evidence. He hadn't been sure of anything until my accidental confession over the phone the night before. Reflecting on it later, I realized that all my careful plans to keep the affair a secret had been in vain. It turned out that a friend of Dave's had overheard Alan boasting about being with me and had tipped Dave off. Dave's offhand comment about Alan during our phone call had been a deliberate test to see how I would react, and my shocked response had confirmed his worst fears. The realization of how much I had shocked and hurt him filled me with remorse. Daddy, on the other hand, showed no such remorse. After dismissing the lawyer from the room, he hinted that fabricating evidence of Dave's infidelity might be necessary to protect my reputation. Even this suggestion didn't elicit an emotional response from Dave. I actually thought he had completely shut down emotionally until the lawyer returned and started talking about how mothers usually get custody, and how fathers these days often only get to see their kids every other weekend. I saw his expression harden, but I couldn't bear to look at him. He didn't deserve any of this. He loved his daughters deeply, spent every possible moment with them, and showered them with affection. That's why I could afford to be away from home so often. The confrontation ended with Dad informing Dave that myself and the girls would stay with him for a few days. Dad wanted Dave to experience how lonely life would be without us, as a warning. We were supposed to return Tuesday evening, just in time for our annual masquerade party. Dad assumed Dave would act like everything was normal by then and not ruin such a big event meant to showcase our happy family. As a final jab, Dad assured Dave I would have his full financial support, while making sure Dave struggled financially with limited access to good legal advice. Dad didn't hold back. Whatever happened between me and Dave, my dad's support for him was over for good. When I left, Dave looked utterly defeated. If I wasn't so weighed down by guilt, I might have felt a sense of satisfaction. I hugged him from behind in his chair and whispered, "We'll make it through, honey," but he didn't react at all. Away from the watchful eyes of his lawyer, Dad unleashed his anger on me for my affair. It seemed like he was venting his frustration over what he had done to a man he had always respected. He warned me sternly that if Dave ever gathered evidence of my wrongdoing, it would all come crashing down. I confidently assured him that I was too clever to let that happen. When the girls and I returned home on Tuesday night, they were warmly welcomed back, but I received a frosty reception. I knew coming back would be uncomfortable, and I had even thought about postponing it. However, two things pushed me to go through with it. First, Dad was leaving the next day for his annual fishing trip, where he and his buddies went off-grid in a remote shack for a week. Second, we needed to prepare the house for Saturday night's party. Dave barely acknowledged me. After putting the girls to bed, I apologized to him for my affair. Dave simply stood up and moved to the guest room on the ground floor, where he had been sleeping. Through the closed and locked door, I tried to reassure him. I had planned to break things off with Alan immediately, but his persistent calls over the past couple of days made me realize he was emotionally attached to me. This posed a slight threat to my career, unlike Dave, who needed solid proof. Just the accusation alone could be damaging. Therefore, I decided to continue seeing Alan for the time being, but with the goal of ending it as soon as I could ensure there would be no fallout. I decided to keep sleeping with Alan while treating him poorly so he wouldn't enjoy my company. I tried explaining this strategy to Dave through the locked door, also mentioning I'd be late home on Monday because I needed to see Alan. With no response or visual cues from Dave, I had no clue if he understood or accepted my plans. But I couldn't dwell on that. There was a party to prepare for. This party had been a tradition since we moved into our mini-mansion 8 years ago. It wasn't tied to any specific occasion, but was purely aimed at impressing and networking with the influential people in our community. Dad never attended because he didn't want me overshadowed by his presence. I'm proud to say that with advice from professionals, this event had become one of the must-attend social gatherings of the year. We had a DJ, a dance floor, tasteful decorations, and an abundance of drinks. Every guest was carefully chosen. Each one had the potential to advance my career in some way. The party was so crucial that ensuring Dave's full participation became my top priority over the next couple of days. Long story short, I did manage to get him to grudgingly agree to attend and participate. That was a huge relief. However, our interaction ended there. He mostly ignored me for the rest of the time. Despite the tension, I couldn't afford to dwell on it. Without Dave's help, organizing the party was a full-time job in itself. I think by Saturday night, I was completely worn out from dealing with a week full of crises. That's probably why I ended up drinking too much. I had 2 glasses of wine to unwind before Alan showed up. He had to be there. He was my publicist, after all. I thought it was tough keeping him and Dave apart. I remember clearly greeting all the guests at the front door. As the hostess, I wanted to make a strong impression. Even though it was a masquerade ball, everyone should know who was in charge. Over 50 influential people attended: school board members, the local bishop, politicians, and party bigwigs. There were even a couple of judges. Once everyone settled in, we started serving food. I mingled with the guests as they lined up for their portions of professionally roasted pig. I never really relaxed at these events. They were too important. This year was especially tense because I had to keep Dave and Alan from crossing paths. The tension finally eased when Dave handed me a glass of punch, about 2.5 hours into the party. He whispered that he'd spiked it with a bit of vodka to help me relax, which touched me deeply. I saw it as a peace offering, so I accepted and drank it, albeit reluctantly. I was already past my usual limit for being a lightweight with alcohol, but I appreciated Dave's gesture so much that I downed it quickly. After that, my memory gets fuzzy, and the next thing I knew, I woke up the next morning in my bed with a brutal hangover. Once my head stopped pounding, I sought out Dave right away to make sure I hadn't made a fool of myself. He reassured me that I'd mingled until an hour before the party ended, and then he found me asleep in our bed. Everyone was too busy having a good time to notice my absence. He said I hadn't done anything unusual. Relieved, I tried to find my cell phone to network a bit and apologize for missing church. It was nowhere to be found, and we no longer had a landline. I stayed in bed the rest of the day to nurse my headache and doze off. All that sleep meant I was wide awake by 5 a.m. the next day. I got up, craving coffee badly. The kitchen light was on, and Dave was sitting at the table. He didn't move when I entered and kissed him on the top of his head. Here's how our conversation went, as far as I can remember. He hasn't spoken to me face to face since then. "Why are you up so early?" I asked. He looked at me with a mix of disbelief and hurt. Since I found out that the woman I love completely, and who I thought loved me, was betraying me, I've hardly slept at all. Looking back, I realize I should have responded more sympathetically to that statement. Instead, I snapped. Maybe it was days of guilt and frustration over not remembering the party and wasting a day in bed that got to me. Don't you always say if you can't fix a problem, don't stress about it? Dad laid out how things are going to go. Just accept it and move on with life. Dave sat stiff in his chair. His next words came out in a hiss, his eyes blazing into mine. What? Just accept being made a fool of? He stopped, visibly struggling to stay composed. Trying to reassure him, I said, "Just for now, darling. It'll be over before you know it. Oh, and remember, I'll be home late tonight. I have plans with Alan." Dave shot up so fast his chair tipped over with a loud crash. In the sudden silence, his stillness was stark. He stood with fists clenched and unclenched at his sides, the fabric rustling with each movement. If I hadn't been confident in Daddy's arrangements, I might have been genuinely concerned. Dave's tone went beyond a hiss. He was practically spitting. "Do you really think I'll accept being a man who's been publicly embarrassed? A man with no pride and no choices? Do you? Your dad may live by that motto. If you have someone by the balls, their hearts and minds will soon follow. But I'm not wired that way, and never will be." With that, he stormed out for his morning run. I sat there, mulling over his words. Was there something I hadn't considered? Did he have any option but to comply with the situation? I didn't think so. Shaking off those thoughts, I began searching earnestly for my phone. Eventually, I found it. But the battery was dead, so I plugged it in to charge. As a small gesture of reconciliation, I made Sarah's school lunch and prepared for my day at work. The kids were up and about before Dave returned home, so we didn't get a chance to talk further. I left for work, unaware of what the day held in store or the turbulent days that followed. Looking back, I regret not at least saying goodbye to Dave's kids that morning.
Dave sighed. If the outcome hadn't been the end of my marriage and a major disruption in your lives, that Monday would have been quite satisfying. You've heard about what your mom did to me, and it's crucial that you understand my actions afterward and why I took them. I had no doubt that I was the primary influence in your lives, and once the decision to end the marriage was made, I believed you would be better off with me. I always knew your mother was ambitious and self-centered, but until then, I was proud of her achievements and overlooked her flaws as a wife and mother. That all changed with her affair. Her insistence on continuing it confirmed to me how self-centered she had become. The problem was that I couldn't count on the courts to agree with me. I consulted several lawyers, and each one told me my chances of gaining primary custody were slim. However, they all agreed that if I could get Martha to leave the family home, my chances would greatly improve. I knew I had to do something drastic enough to make her leave. Ironically, it was Martha's father and lawyer who unintentionally gave me the solution. They were so focused on blocking my options that they inadvertently pointed me toward a path they didn't consider. They thought they had left me with a palatable option, but it wasn't acceptable to me. They were law-abiding citizens and didn't see the drastic step I took as a viable possibility. So what did you do, Dad? I'll explain. Let me start with the phone calls I received from your mother that day. The first call came just after 9 a.m. It was 9:06 a.m. when the first call came in. Dave speaking. Dave, it's me. Alan's boss just rang. He said because of what happened with Alan at the party, his company won't represent me anymore. If this gets out, it could ruin my chances for pre-selection. What happened? What did they say I did to Alan? They wouldn't tell me. It's not alleged, dear. You need him in the groin in front of about 30 people. I have it all on video from the security cameras if you want to see. I didn't. Sorry, dear, I have to go. By 10:23 a.m., the second call had Dave answering again. Dave speaking. Dave, what are you hiding? The diocese secretary just called. They want me to resign from all church committees, not just step down from chairing them, but leave them completely. They wouldn't say why. What happened Saturday night? What did I do after I got too drunk? I think the bishop ordered them to cut ties with you immediately because he caught someone doing something inappropriate with you in our downstairs bathroom on Saturday. What? Why? Sorry, dear, I have to go. Then, at 10:42 a.m., the third call struck another blow. Oh, Dave, I just listened to my voicemail. Half my contacts called to tell me how awful I am and asking why I did that to you. Do what to you, Dave? What are they talking about? I'm not sure, dear. Maybe they're talking about you dancing provocatively, or rather, practically having closeness with that guy on the dance floor. They felt a bit embarrassed for me seeing that. Or maybe it's because when they asked why I didn't intervene, I told them you insisted on your right to sleep with other men and threatened to destroy me and our family if I objected publicly. You didn't. I certainly did. You and your dad thought you had me cornered with only one choice, to to go along with your twisted plan. I found another way, though, even if it meant enduring some public humiliation. Okay, maybe a lot of humiliation after tomorrow's newspaper hits. But Dave, when I asked you on Sunday if I behaved myself during the times I couldn't remember, you said yes. I think you heard what you wanted to hear, dear. What I actually said was you didn't do anything out of character, and I stand by that. But I've been led to believe that all promiscuous women behave that way. I, I, I don't know how I could have lost control like that. Can you call the bishop and others to explain it wasn't really me? That I lose control when I drink too much? Why should I do that for you, dear? Because you're my husband, and husbands defend their wives. Like you defended me when your dad and his lawyer described how they'd destroy me if I didn't let you sleep with other men? Dave, you know it wasn't like that. I messed up and tried to fix things as fast as possible. I only slept with Alan, and it was going to be just once or maybe 2 more times. 3 tops. Dave, can you come home so we can talk? I'll be here for another hour. The head of the school board is coming to see me. Yes, I know what she wants to discuss. She and most of the board were there Saturday night, remember? I don't think you'll have much luck. She went through a messy divorce a few years back when she caught her husband cheating. And just so you know, I'm already home. I just finished talking to the local newspaper and TV stations. I even gave them footage from the security cameras. So, unless there's something else, I need to figure out if there's any part of your life left that I haven't completely ruined yet. Present day, Dave finishes his story. After that, there was nothing but silence on the line. I went to work and picked you girls up after. When we got home, it was clear your mom had been back briefly, packed some clothes, and left in a hurry. She even left the front door wide open. She went into hiding in another state, staying with one of her sisters. She was too embarrassed to be seen in public for months. By the time she resurfaced, the judge had ruled she abandoned the family home, so custody was awarded to me. Did her father try to help her? No, not really. He called once to threaten me when he got back from his fishing trip, but I think his boss told him to keep his distance from his daughter or resign. He chose to retire. Maybe he couldn't afford lawyers, or they told him it was a lost cause. I'll never know. We never heard from his legal team again. I hate to admit it, but he was still begging to see his grandchildren when he passed away from a heart attack about a year later. Your birth mom begged me a few times to bring you girls to where she was hiding. But by then, I had met Maria, the mom you know, and didn't want to confuse you. I heard she fell in with a rough crowd after that, and I lost touch with her. If you want, I can try to find her contact info if you're interested in reaching out to her. Neither of the young adults seemed particularly interested in that offer. And that's why, girls, you shouldn't drink. All eyes turned toward the actress. Girls, with what your dad just told us, I think I know what happened and why he invited me here today. You see, he once promised to tell me the whole story. Honestly, I'm surprised this hasn't been splashed across the tabloids before now. Before I continue, promise me you won't repeat anything I say. After waiting for nods of agreement from everyone, she continued. I never thought I'd be an actress before your dad suggested it. Like many orphans, I struggled financially in college. I ended up doing some high-end escort work. A friend got me into it. And before you judge, I mean escort in the traditional sense, accompanying guys on dates. It could be a company dinner or just keeping a lonely businessman company for the day. Some girls went further, but the agency I worked with never pushed that. Besides, I didn't need to. With my looks and what I'm told is my bubbly personality, I was in demand. Anyway, one day my agents arranged a meeting with a guy who introduced himself as Mr. X, your dad. We met once and he said I fit the bill. I always wondered why he picked me. She looked at Dave, waiting for an answer. Because I scoured all the escort websites until I found someone who could pass as my ex-wife at a masquerade party. Sure. Well, I was going to decline, but the amount of money your dad offered made me change my mind. I wouldn't have done it, but your dad said I could bring my boyfriend along too. The actress paused to sip her drink, carefully considering her words to ensure they wouldn't harm her career. Your dad instructed me to be near a specific address at 9 p.m. When he called, Kent and I walked from our car to the back gate where your dad let us in. He handed me a dress and a mask. Sorry to interrupt, but I want everyone to hear the whole story. The party was in full swing and almost everyone was quite tipsy. That might have been helped by me spiking the punch bowl with 2 bottles of vodka. It was amusing watching her trying to play the perfect hostess while keeping a close eye on me and her boyfriend. I noticed she was drinking steadily, so I timed when I gave her the spiked drink pretty well, I think. I crushed up 3 of her own sleeping pills and slipped them into a glass of punch. I even mentioned the vodka to her. It took about 10 minutes, but once I saw her stumbling, I gently guided her to our bedroom. She fell asleep quickly, so I removed her dress and mask. The final touch was for you to wear the same perfume she always used. The actress nodded as if this all made perfect sense, then continued her story. I put on the dress. It wasn't a perfect fit, but no one seemed to notice. I dabbed on a bit of the perfume and donned the mask. I expected to be escorted to the party on your dad's arm while Kent entertained himself, but it was even stranger than that. After some brief instructions, your dad instructed Kent and me to enjoy ourselves, act like a couple, but avoid talking to anyone. Following that last bit was a bit tricky, but we opted to hit the dance floor to discourage chit-chat. Let's just say Kent and I danced very intimately, and that jerk had his hands all over my rear end. I kept glancing around, and most people were looking at us uncomfortably, then looking toward your dad. He didn't seem to be paying us any mind. There was one guy who kept trying to cut in on Kent, but your dad had warned us not to let him. After about 5 dances, I went to the restroom, and Kent, the randy jerk, followed me in. After I finished up, he hoisted me onto the sink so my rear end was perched on the vanity, then kissed me and lifted my dress, and, well, I can't believe I'm admitting this, especially to you girls, but he touched me. I'm pretty sure he was planning to go further than that. But right then, a guy barged into the room, clearly desperate to use the restroom. He turned bright red when he saw us and hurried away. He was a big guy with a red beard, wasn't he? I guess so. Bishop Carling. Oh my God. That even scared Kent off from fooling around in the bathroom. We started heading back to the dance floor, but he got over his, hesitation and pulled me into the shadows of some trees. We were making out and he had my dress pulled up from behind when a floodlight suddenly turned on and everything went silent. We turned around and saw everyone staring at us. What could we do? We just went back to the dance floor. That guy your dad showed me a photo of kept trying to interrupt. He kept calling me darling and sweetheart even after I told him to go away. It was around then that I looked over and saw a group of people surrounding your dad. They didn't look happy. Actually, they looked accusing. She paused and raised her eyebrows at Dave. Well, first the bishop, then the head of her school board came over and asked what was going on with my wife. Girls, I want you to know I didn't lie. I told the absolute truth when I said she demanded the right to do whatever she wanted with other men. Then, I explained how I found out about her latest affair and how she and her father threatened to destroy me, even making up lies if I tried to stop her. He smiled as he recalled the moment. They could hear the truth in my voice. They knew I was being completely honest. That makes sense? At one point, everyone around your dad turned and gave me nasty looks. It was really awkward. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. There was so much anger in the air, it could have fueled a small war for a month. I don't know if the bishop was going to mention what he saw in the bathroom until the security spotlight I activated singled you out. But after that, he let loose. No one could believe my prim and proper wife could act like that. I think every wife, and even a few husbands, hugged me in the next few minutes. That all changed when the next drama on the dance floor unfolded. Do you have to talk about that? I'm not proud of it. You explain it then. The actress took a moment to recall the exact sequence of events from so many years ago. Well, Kent and I were just dancing, minding our own business. People started whispering to each other. Soon, half the dancers had cleared out, and more eyes were on us. Then that jerk your dad showed us a photo of came up, grabbed my arm, and tried to pull me away. I had enough. I turned and kneed him right in the you-know-what. It was so funny. He did that thing you see in movies where his eyes crossed and he started to sink down to his knees. He must have tried to stop himself because he reached out to grab me. Kent, well, he's always been the protective type. I mean, I married him, right? He grabbed the guy's arm, spun him around and punched him, lifted him right off his feet and plopped him down on his butt. The guy just sat there, one hand on his face and the other down below. Everyone started clapping. It was pretty surreal. That was your ex's boyfriend, right? Yeah, his name was Alan. I might have mentioned to people that he was her boyfriend, which is why he kept trying to interrupt. What happened to him? Well, the party kind of broke up after that. Almost everyone came up to me, asking if they could help. One of the judges even suggested I have my lawyer look into mental cruelty. I just told them to do what they knew was right. Alan was one of the last to leave. I caught him limping away and, well, I let out some of my anger and frustration on him before he left. I heard later that his company found out the whole story and quietly fired him. He'd been with them since he graduated and they wouldn't give him a good reference. He moved to another state, and last I heard, he was working at McDonald's. After that, I didn't really keep up. Sarah asked the actress, "Did you witness any of that?" "I stayed until the end, but I didn't see that creepy man again. Your dad came back and paid me the rest of the money he owed." I did ask him what the whole evening was about, but he seemed upset by then and just said he'd explain one day. Ken and I were about to leave, but your dad smiled through his tears and joked that I should consider acting. Surprisingly, that got me thinking, and within 2 weeks, I applied to NIDA. I got accepted soon after. Money talks, you know? Now, I need to call Kent. He's eager to hear the story as soon as I know it. He said he'd wait up all night if he had to. Standing up to bid her farewells, the actress continued, "Goodbye, Sarah. I'll keep an eye on your career. If you ever need help or a boost, give me a call. Wendy, if you decide to follow your sister and run into any trouble, don't hesitate to reach out. I have a few favors owed to me at NIDA. Maria, take care of your husband and these two troublemakers. They're special, all of them." She wiped tears from her eyes and turned back to the younger girls. "From what your dad told me, he had your best interests at heart and did what he had to do when the odds were against him. When he asks for your forgiveness, I suggest you give it wholeheartedly." Overcome with emotion, she couldn't find the right words for Dave, so she hugged him tightly before leaving quickly, trying to hold back tears. As they watched her leave, the girls exchanged glances. Wendy nodded at Sarah, who turned to their dad. "No need to ask, Dad. We forgive you. We barely remember our birth mother. You've always been both mom and dad to us while we lived there. Then Maria came into our lives and showed us what a real mother should be like." They all stood up and embraced in a group hug. Dave, who never hid his emotions from those he loved, was crying openly. "Thank you, girls. I thought I was doing the right thing at the time, but you can never be certain, can you? I don't know why I ever doubted myself. Just look at both of you. Beautiful, confident, healthy, and wise. I must have done something right." Now, everyone was in tears. All three women reassured Dave that he had been an outstanding father. The waiter cleared his throat behind them, holding a large creme caramel dessert. Dave glanced at Maria, who met his gaze and shook her head, indicating she hadn't ordered it. Setting the dessert on the table, the waiter passed Dave a note. It simply read, "A hard shell, but a soft, sweet center." Dave passed the note to Maria, who chuckled softly. "Looks like she didn't fall for your tough guy act either." 3 time zones away, Martha lay awake, trying hard not to disturb the overweight man next to her. Once her meager divorce settlement had dried up, Martha attempted to secure a teaching job in her new state. Despite completing a 3-month bridging course, she struggled due to lack of references. The only offers she received were from small rural schools in less desirable areas. These jobs paid the bills, but Martha yearned to return to city life. Unable to find a position in the public school system, she reluctantly turned to more desperate measures to secure a job at a private school. The man lying beside her was the chairman of the board at an exclusive girls' school. Martha hoped he wouldn't wake up and initiate another round of closeness before he left. The very idea made Martha feel nauseous. Sticking to her plan was challenging at times. The plan to find a job she could be proud of, one that would allow her to reconnect with her daughters and play a meaningful role in their lives. It had taken nearly 15 years, but Martha had finally realized what truly mattered. She turned onto her side, tears silently soaking her pillow.